welcome to our 7th episode of Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, a collection of Asian American Pacific Islander social work voices. Hi, I'm Chris Lum.
And I'm Francis Joseph Gallego.
And we are API social workers from the Bay Area. We're here to create a safe space to uplift AAPI social work voices, stories, and experiences across diverse communities and spaces.
The bamboo ceiling refers to the invisible barriers that limit Asian and Pacific Islander API social workers from advancing into leadership roles. Despite high qualifications, APIs hold only 6% of senior positions in sectors like government and nonprofits, far below their workforce representation.
Today's episode is on Stories of Resistance, API's social workers changing systems. We will be interviewing Deborah Son, who is the CEO of the Family Violence Appellate Project and previous Executive Director with the National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. Ms. Son has over 15 years of experience as an activist and leader in systems reform, community-grounded advocacy, and equity and policy design and implementation. Her work spans across various fields including trauma-informed care, gender-based violence, children and family services, and public and behavioral health. She has dedicated much of her career to bring various service platforms together in collaboration toward meaningful achievements in social justice. In previous work, she was a national trainer in domestic violence homicide prevention, spearheaded the growth and integration of medical-legal partnerships throughout public health care systems, and has facilitated leadership development opportunities for individuals across the state of California, raising the capacity of individuals and networks who represent the communities they serve. And welcome, Deborah. And our first question is if you can kind of tell us a little bit about how your journey into social work, how you came into your journey into social work, and what led you to the work you do today.
Well, I'm glad you survived that bio because it was a little bit lengthy. I think it just goes to say that I've been through quite a journey to get here today. Well, thank you, Francis and Chris, for having me, first of all. To answer your question about how I got into social work, that also was a different journey, and so I feel like I've lived quite a few lives in my lifetime, and all in the best senses possible. So when and I paused trying to reflect on how far back in my youth, in my younger years to go back, but I do think it's very relevant to my journey, particularly as a Korean American social worker, as to what led me here, even in young adult years. So my entire upbringing, very similar to first generation Asian American homes. I had two options growing up. I was either to become a doctor or a lawyer. And I joke about the fact that some families had the option of the engineer. I did not have that third option. I had the two options. And I actually really did I love language. Language is my art. I cannot draw worth anything, but I love spoken word. I love written word, and I love the art of debate. I love the art of utilizing language to express yourselves and to think critically about ideas and experiences, etc. So the idea of going to law school actually was appealing to me, and I did go to law school, as was expected of me in my sort of first generation upbringing. And I had a very disparate experience working. I worked at a law firm for 1 year between my undergraduate experience at UCLA and then going into law school. But the ways in which I envisioned my experience as a lawyer were very disparate from real life experiences once I was at the law firm as well as once I was in law school. And much of it was really just, the lack of representation of people that looked like me in the school, the lack of sort of supportive mechanisms in the school experience, and and my being in a different area, disconnected from family, and really trying to navigate this push pull of choosing a career that was almost predefined for me and trying to make it fit into this mold of what felt good for me in that earlier stage of my life. So all that to say, I decided to withdraw from law school, because there just was that the sort of disconnect, and funnily enough, that's actually what brought me up to the Bay Area. I worked as an editor for in San Francisco, and just kind of wandered around aimlessly after I decided I'm going to make this really big life decision to not become an attorney because it just didn't seem to fit. And I just, I used my bachelor's degree in English to do editorial work, and was just really bored. I felt under motivated, and still feeling like I wasn't sure what was next, because if you have that definition of what you're going to be for the vast majority of your childhood, and suddenly you're in it and you decide, wow, this doesn't feel good, you're pretty much at a loss. And so there wasn't like a vision of what next. There wasn't an idea or a space, a familial space, a supportive space, where I could envision what was next. So in any event, I wandered around aimlessly, and I ended up doing some volunteer work. I volunteered, so I'm actually a survivor of gang-related sexual assault at the age of 17. I'm also a survivor of domestic violence and witnessing domestic violence in the home. And so my heart was drawn to those issue areas, so I decided to volunteer for the local domestic violence agency. I volunteered for a rape crisis agency. I also volunteered for a hospice agency. And what when I, as a social worker, when I psychoanalyze myself, sort of in the later experience, I do recognize that I was drawn particularly to these opportunities because of my own lived experiences, my own experiences with trauma, my own sort of desire and appetite to fill some voids in my heart, where as a daughter of immigrants, I never got to know my grandparents who are in South Korea and who have since passed, but I never had the intergenerational experience and exposure. And so, hospice work enabled me to have that experience. So all of that to say, I fell in love with the volunteer work. I started ditching my paid job to go volunteer. That's how much I enjoyed it. It was just filling me in a way that was so novel, so exciting, so heart-filling. And it was incredibly exciting, right? Because you have this, person who in their entire upbringing has envisioned a version of themselves that was predefined by sort of societal pressures, and then suddenly, I'm exposed to different ways of being in the world, different ways of giving to the world that suddenly gave me light. And so I started learning about social work because I was in these different, sort of health and human spaces, and decided I want to formalize my education in this space and actually start getting paid to do work that I love, because I was doing volunteer work all the time because I loved it so much. So that's what brought me to social work. I applied to a Master of Social Work program, and sort of the rest is history. And there is more in terms of what brought me eventually to FAP, the Family Violence Appellate Project. But ultimately, it was a journey of self-exploration coupled with opportune moments where I got to connect my personal passions, my personal interests, my personal life experiences with ways to give to the world, ways in which I could be in the world and ultimately make that my career.
Thanks. Wow, that was really touching. And you really speak to, we never really know the things we have to go through, how it's going to help. And it's, all the things you went through has really helped you to be a stronger advocate. And in a stronger leader. And I just really appreciate you sharing. I mean, there's just so much that you went through. I want to ask one
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Was there any? I mean, because a lot of API social work, including myself, go through these challenges. You know, the family pressure. Was there anything you had to overcome in with your family expectations in this whole path? Explain them. I'm changing from law into social work.
The short answer is yes. Absolutely. And then the longer answer is that it was such an incredibly painful decision to make when I decided not to become an attorney. I probably oversimplify it just for the sake of time, and not at all to be dismissive of that part. But I think it's important to elevate. So I'm glad you're going a little rogue and asking me these questions because I think they're relevant. It was a hard conversation to have, with my family, and it continues to be a hard conversation. It doesn't ever go away. And I think this is one of the things that particularly folks who live in intersectional identity, intersection of culture have to contend with is that, the fact that my parents struggle with the idea of success being defined in different ways was the way that they were brought up. They're not bad people. They're not. They're not. They were resourced in a very different way, in a very different context. However, that doesn't mean as a younger person that we ourselves as human beings cannot be frustrated, cannot feel almost a loss of sort of inspiration or almost embarrassment, that you couldn't meet that particular standard. But that is the push-pull, because we are living in these intersections of experiences that, yes, some of these things are defined by a particular experience, by a particular history, by a particular, type of perspective of success. And just as the world is evolutionary and things around us change and nature changes, so do humans. And that is, we are the embodiment of constant change. And so being okay with the fact that, yes, my parents put really, hard pressures on me as a child to get the A pluses and not the A minuses. And it was also how they showed love. And I can be frustrated with some of that. I'm allowed to be angry that, I wasn't introduced, and maybe not angry at them, maybe just angry at a, situation that I wasn't introduced to these other opportunities, because I had to figure out social work later in my 20s, not in my, so there's some of that, right? Like all this wasted time. Oh my gosh, I had to pay off my law school loans, all of that. It's a lot. And then, kind of coupling that with, if your parents, for instance, like still preserve maybe frustration that you didn't pursue a particular career or judgment or whatever the case might be, like that as adults is also incredibly painful, because, we want those that we love and those that have cared for us to be proud of us. And they may or may not see that, everybody's kind of in a different space. For me personally, I do genuinely believe like the struggle is still there. I do genuinely believe they see my success in a different way, and that I am, for better or worse, tasked with also providing them with education about what success can look like, because it is very different here. And also paying attention to the other ways in which they love. And I think that's the piece that that takes some deconditioning, because they do show up in other ways to show my kids love, to show me love with food and way too many snacks and things I don't need. which is a very first generation experience. But it's almost, like, it's interesting because when we work with clients, we oftentimes are very intentional about being strengths focused, opportunities focused, really trying to elevate and highlight the ways in which beauty shines, and that's some of what we do, what we're forced to do with those we love too, that we're really frustrated with, is to also pay attention to the others, and I get that, the judgment or the disappointment is louder. You hear the criticisms louder than you do the compliments. That's human. And the compliments also do exist, and so it's about elevating those as well. And not at all to say it's easy. I, as a middle-aged person, still struggle with all of that. But I think it's kind of like the conversations that we have with our clients, that it is a lifelong experience, and there are ways to experience it incrementally and still be able to find joy.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Chris was saying as well. I really want to express my appreciation, and gratitude for you sharing your continued, authenticity in your story, and how you've been able to turn, your pain into possibility and change, and being able to be vulnerable, with your story. I know a lot of times, like, especially in the Asian American Pacific Islander community, we're not really open about sexual violence. We're not really open about domestic violence or interpersonal partner violence, and there's a lot of shame and stigma, and how stigma is something that we struggle with daily, in terms of like how we deal with different things. And I'm just so grateful, and I feel so privileged that you're able to feel safe enough to share your story with us, and I feel so grateful about it. So thank you so much for sharing your story, because it allows other people to share what they've been through, and they feel empowered enough to also, because it allows people to say that they too cannot be ashamed, and they too can feel empowered. So thank you so much, Deborah, for being a vessel and sharing that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It means a lot. It means a lot to me, because I also do trauma work and and all that different things. So thank you. In terms of the work that you continue to do, what examples or what experiences have made you realize that systems have needed to be changed, and what have you been able to do as a social worker to do that? And
I was reflecting on this question, and to be honest, I don't think it was a single moment. I think it was a multitude of moments over a lifetime of experience. I think one of the things that strikes me as poignant but also sad is that if I reflect on the times that I was marginalized or harmed or experienced some kind of bias as a child, I didn't have the capacity and or resources to be able to identify that this is not okay, at least not in the ways that I can now. You might know that, wow, that hurts. However, when it's normalized in the context of societal circles, your classrooms, then you're just less likely to see it as something that you could challenge. So all of that to say, I think over the course of my lifetime, I've certainly experienced firsthand racism and witnessed it against my parents, who are primarily Korean speaking. I've certainly seen it in a variety of personal experiences in the context of systems, educational system, with the criminal justice system, with the healthcare systems, all of that. I in just informal systems like going to the grocery store, going to go get gas, all of these day-to-day things. I've witnessed how systems need to change. The ways in which I would say the I guess the distinction that I would make is that, you know, in reflection, I think these touch points happen to us, and when I say us, I just mean broadly folks who, you know, carry traits that are generally, you know, susceptible or vulnerable or can be seen as targeted, or, you know, or what have you, is that, you know, that they do happen. And there's a distinction between, you know, them happening versus an opportunity to feel empowered to push up against it.
Mhm.
And I think that's what going into social work essentially did for me. Not all of social work is perfect. Not all of systems are perfect. Not even all the social work programs and, you know, organizations and institutions, they're not perfect either. But the experience of social work, you know, and doing the work gave me this opportunity to reflect, name, and then more strategically and systematically identify that, wow, these types of events are not okay, and what are the potential solutions to address them, not just for myself, not just for, you know, young Deborah that I remember, but also for our communities, in the ways in which all of those moments of my youth and of everything that brought me to today can then color in and fill in, and then you witness it in clients. So you have these like life experiences when you're witnessing things that happen to your communities and your organizations and your clients, through your client stories, and you carry that, and then you're able to fill in, you know, the sort of architect that needs to be built to then resolve, break down, rebuild whatever system. And that is, I think, the color of social work, that it's not about just being able to see that things are wrong, and help people process and be with them and do the emotional support work and like have them navigate systems. Like, that's part of it. And it's also, yeah, let's take all of that stuff, that hurt, that pain, that all the goodness, everything good too, and let's hold systems accountable, those that are in power to do better, and then be able to map out what that looks like. And I think that's sort of the bridge between like the direct service work and sort of the systemic advocacy work.
Yeah, I think you speak so eloquently about, you know, not just the power of, like, I think self-reflection and discernment, but also the power of empathy and the power of, you know, looking at things not just in a micro but a macro level, right?
Yeah,
And the power of also this parallel process that we have with the patients we serve and the communities we serve, and how we can use ourselves and use the communities we work with for a greater good, and the healingness of that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's so cyclical, because we experience, we receive from our clients, we hold that, and then we also give, and then we get as a result of that. And so it's all just incredible. And yeah, it's a beautiful opportunity to do amazing work and also learn how to take care of yourself at the same time.
That's true. You know, I tell Chris all the time is that the beauty about our field, you know, is that we learn every day.
Oh my gosh.
There's so much humility in the work we do. And also, we all have a story. You know, some of us choose to share, some of us don't choose to share, right? But there's a lot of reasons why we do the work we do. And I think that's the humility and the grace of the work.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks. Our next question is, can you share a moment in your career when you challenged a system, a policy, or workplace norm, and what happened in that experience?
So I was thinking about this question too, and I don't, the thing that it's also sad in reflecting about this, because when I think about the earlier part of my career, so, you know, I worked at a law firm after my undergraduate experience, and then immediately after grad school, getting my social work degree, worked in a hospital setting, and then, you know, worked at a few nonprofits. Truthfully, I think in all of these places, there was a lot of there was a lot of marginalization and harm that was mimicked by the institution, that we fight, in and of itself in the community. So things like, we fight against racism, we fight against societal challenges like poverty and income inequality, all of those things. And a lot of that hierarchy has then become institutionalized, where working at a law firm or a healthcare system, or even a nonprofit, unfortunately, the hierarchy is there. The power imbalances are there. The abuse is there. There was a lot of sexual harassment that was normalized in the workplace, and all of the above. I remember vividly thinking, if I go, back into the nonprofit work, it is predominantly represented by employees who identify as female, and so thinking that would be more safe. But there are also power dynamics there too, and so I don't think any institution is necessarily doesn't struggle with this in terms of mimicking a lot of these harms. And I say institution, but I'm going to call it out and say it's the people running these institutions that have accountability, and the people in leadership positions. And I think when I'm trying to remember, why didn't I challenge that time that, I felt like I was being sexually harassed by a physician in, the emergency department when I was working as a social worker? Because you don't feel you have the power to, it's hierarchical. Mm-hmm. Your place, right? In terms of that hierarchy structure. And that was applicable in a law firm as well. Similarly, the nonprofit, you have your executive director, you have your directors, you have your managers, your place, quote unquote. And I'm, for anybody just listening, I am quoting because I don't think it's the right thing to think. And I didn't feel I was resourced. While it's wrong, while you feel the harm, you don't have the resources, the people power, the time and space to even think about what fighting against that actually looks like. Let alone you don't have the community to fight against that. And then you kind of layer on the fact that if you're not paid well, if you're balancing caring for an elderly loved one and a kiddo, all these things, right? If you're housing unstable yourselves. So all that to say, what changed, and I think I'm gonna kind of organically jump ahead in your questions, is that through all these experiences, I did feel under-resourced and not lacking in the ability to believe that change was possible if I pushed back. The moment that it changed for me, and this was actually, it was a little bit emotional for me that I realized in preparing for this particular conversation what that actually was, because I don't think I quite realized that it was so defined by a particular type of experience, and the experience was, just to lead up to it, the experience was essentially I met an amazing supervisor, and I tell people this all the time, that supervisors make or break experiences. Organizations can they're going to be largely bureaucratic, particularly if they're large institutions, but gosh, if you get a good leader, oh gosh, it radically changes the ways in which you are resourced to succeed. And so for me, that was, I was interviewing for a job and met this really inspiring CEO. And I had never been a director before, but she was like, wow, you've got lots of, great skills here. And she gave me a director job, and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, that's amazing. You have that much trust in me, even though, you don't know me that well. And then when I actually, got to work with her, there was the level of trust and autonomy and the freedom to be yourself and apply yourself to the work was so freeing. It was, it's like your spirit soaring because you have so many ideas and things that you want to do, but you've been, sort of compartmentalized into this, particular role. And, like there was no micromanaging, there was no power play, there was none of that. And suddenly you're just like, you're empowered, you're, able to push back against ideas, you're able to bring ideas without, fear of retaliation. You don't feel that sense of power imbalance. It is truly like a mission focused work, and that is, holistic. And for me, that significantly was the point where I was like, wow, at that time, if I was better resourced with a better supervisor, I could have pushed up against that particular policy. I could have, advocated for better work condition. I could have, tried to cultivate a better sort of culture within that organization. But when you're not given that ability to open, and it's almost like you have blinders on intentionally, so put on your head by these institutions because they want to keep you within a certain sort of bubble. It was particularly great leadership and trust that enabled me to then be able to believe in the strength of my abilities and then to actualize them. And from then on, it was just like, I stayed in the director role, I blossomed, I went into public policy work, and, soon after that, I became an executive director. It was like the sky was the limit, and all because one person trusted me. And it's interestingly enough, like she's a white woman, and she's retired now, but she was very clear with me that, Deborah, I have blind spots, like, let me know, like, call me in if you see something that, I'm not doing well. That level of leadership, that level of humility, I think of often when I have, kind of embodied this role of being an executive director in these past 6 years. But it's rare. And for me now, I'm sorry, I did jump ahead like a few different questions. For me now, I think of that constantly. Like, I think of when I'm in this really, really hard position of trying to figure out this particular organizational policy, or what can I change, or do I have to make a particular hard decision for the team? How do I do it, and how do I do it well? I think about her, and I think about what she's taught me, what I've seen in good leaders, and how to kind of check yourself when you are practicing within what you have perhaps been conditioned all the years before to think about what is right or a best practice. And so I think that all of that as a whole has factored into my ability to now know that it is my responsibility, because I was given that gift and opportunity to grow and thrive, that I similarly should be and am sharing it with the field. And that means making space for others and similarly showing trust and modeling the ways in which leaders should be, being vocal about it, calling out other leaders who are not modeling similar fashion, and trying to build co-build a sector that really reflects this type of leadership, where people can truly thrive and be okay with then pushing up against systems, challenging people and institutions to do better, because you need, if once you gain power, it's your responsibility to share it, and that I hold very closely to me.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate you sharing just the power of one person helping another, and taking the time to take that chance on someone.
Yeah.
Give someone that chance. I want to also ask, this particular area we asked is, how does culture kind of affect, leadership and voice? Did culture or your cultural background, we talked about how like rocking the boat can be challenge for API leaders. Did any cultural aspect, did you have to overcome any cultural aspect of what it meant to be an advocate, to speak your voice?
Yeah, the short answer again is yes. It's like, all of these things are so intertwined in terms of how we are taught to define success, and then how we use that bar to then define us as we're moving forward in life, and then simultaneously learning to redefine that bar. And I think what that push pull there is, that if you are, so generally speaking, if you are quote unquote subservient, or roll with the punches, or whatever, insert phrase here, which essentially means you play the game. You're playing whatever game it is to rise up in the ranks. You're showing up in the ways in which white leaders typically do. You're sort of embracing, or maybe embodying, a version of yourself that is more reflective of current leadership. Speaking a certain way, pitching a certain way, presenting ideas a certain way. That is what oftentimes people of color have been taught to do, or people who, kind of live in the intersections and live in the margins, because that is how we're taught we are supposed to act to then get to be in spaces of power. This is mimicked in the ways in which we are resourced as well. Nonprofits are told, if you don't do, the things that like government funders want you to do, and apply for the grant applications and do the programs that governments want you to do, we're not going to fund you. It's all mimicked through all the various systems that we navigate. But if you're thinking about sort of organizational growth, when we're taught that is supposed to happen, that then butts up against what we feel should happen, or what we feel we as individuals would bring. It forces us to consider a version of ourselves that is conforming, as opposed to individualized to ourselves. And so that's kind of like the general layer of, if you want to move up in the world, then you're contending with, okay, do I really want to not speak up and challenge the leader in place? Or is it worth the risk to challenge, to embody my own voice and to be my full self? Especially in the context of, the fact that might create a barrier for you. And I will say, that similarly, like when I met, my previous supervisor / mentor, who I referenced earlier, that, she created that space where it felt safe to do so, and where I could essentially, and I use this term loosely, but like practice, what that felt like. And I think the reality was, I remember, being in that leadership space, alongside her in the organization, and still being in other coalition spaces that were primarily like white male led. And behavioral health tends to be like that. It's changing, but even like 10 years ago, a lot of these spaces were white male led, sort of because of the history of behavioral health and psychiatry and sort of who predominated these spaces. But I think when you have somebody in your corner, like her or anybody else that believes in you, or colleagues, or folks that really do trust your leadership as you're growing as a leader, it's that concept that I was referencing earlier, that when you have power, you share it, and essentially you gain power as a result, and you learn that pushing up against things may have risks and may have downsides, but the ultimate benefit is essentially that you are advocating for yourself and your community, and that greater goal then becomes your North Star. As you are, initially it's like, it feels like every sort of barrier block is in front of you, right? When you're sort of an earlier in your career, and you're navigating, trying to find yourself as well as your career. But as people are sharing power with you, it's like these blocks are moving. So I'm a visual person, so I, imagine like these barricades slowly moving because people are sharing power with you, and they're giving you space, they're giving you, muscle, they're giving you tools, they're giving you all the things that you need to slowly knock down those barriers and move closer to the end goal, which is essentially, that you want safety and care and love for the communities that you're advocating for. And so I think, particularly as somebody who is a person of color or a woman of color, a survivor, you start with more barriers. You're just essentially going to start, with more of those sort of barricades. And I've had moments where when I was first, getting into leadership and directorship, I've had people say in meetings, gosh, you look really young. And these are, like group spaces, like they're coalition spaces. These are professionals, and so, and that's just like I have so many examples, but that's one example. And those things knock you down a little bit. And then you make space for it. You lean on your mentors, you lean on your people, and again, they share that power with you, and then you're able to, keep going forward. And the reality is that I think as a person of color, a woman in this like underrepresented spaces, I have to come to expect it. I'm also, I run a nonprofit law firm and predominantly represented by lawyers. And so, there are various ways in which, I just know that I'm going to be questioned as to my competency, and then color that with, my presentation, my identity, the fact that I might look young in some spaces. And I have to carry that when I enter spaces. And so I have begun to just resource myself differently. I expect it, and it's a little bit of a paradox because we shouldn't have to expect it. We should expect better, and knowing that a lot of that reality is there. I also hold my colleagues accountable to helping me call in and being there to call in behavior that is inappropriate. And I think that is some of the sort of collegial space that we're in that there's a responsibility that I have to also trudge forward and keep fighting and keep building up my tools and my muscle to fight up against these isms. Similarly with my colleagues, my white allies, my male allies, anybody else in that space, they similarly have accountability as well. And I think that's something that, while I'm talking about, oh yes, I had this great mentor, I got lucky enough to have this great mentor, not everybody's gonna get that. We all have a collective and individual responsibility to make space for leaders who represent the community, who represent, our clients. And so, there isn't that mentality and message externally of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's not that. It's that we learn to have additional tools. We learn different ways to be okay amid a world that is not okay. Right. And we also lean on those to step in and hold them accountable to step in to similarly walk that journey with us. So it's all of us kind of in it. So even if somebody is not of a marginalized identity, they too have a responsibility. And that is the lesson that's external, that, the louder we are, the more that we message that this is a communal effort. That's the only way that we're going to be able to make space. Not wait for people to create space, because hopefully that does happen, but we also want to take space, and so I think it's going to be a collective effort.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing the way you've been able to navigate your role as a leader, the way you've been able to decolonize white
It's
supremacy.
a good word for it. Yeah.
You've been able to decolonize, right? Just really white supremacy in leadership, the way you've been able to make leadership more relational instead of transactional. I think that's very powerful. How you've been able to also use your authentic self in leadership because, you know, mentorship is so important, especially among BIPOC communities, especially among AAPI communities. You know, especially the importance of like what you brought up before, like intersectionality and building community. Um, you know, if you could give a piece of advice, because you know a lot of API social workers, you know, sometimes there's, because I'm a clinical supervisor myself, and there's a lot of like
Yeah.
ambivalence among API social workers to reach leadership because of the whiteness, right? That they're afraid because their voice won't be heard. They're afraid that they can't be too authentic, right? They're afraid they're going to be too loud. They're afraid that, you know, they may have a past. It's not going to, you know, whatever. What advice, because you've talked so eloquently about authenticity and humility and leadership and, you know, of finding your voice, right? But if how do you talk to someone to kind of go over their fear or go over the fact that, oh, what if I'm like a puppet, right? Or what if I'm this? What if
Yeah.
I'm
Like
that?
tokenized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. What can you
Yeah.
tell them to kind of because I have that fear too, right?
Yeah.
I've been in this field for a very long time, and I help, you know, I want to make sure that we are able to uplift ourselves. And you say a very good point, like we have to create our seat in a table, especially now with the current with the current political climate and the destruction of DEI. What advices would you give them?
I mean, the first thing I would do is to just validate,
Hmm.
you know, that
Hmm.
these concerns, the you know, these fears are real, and I
Hmm.
think it's really important for us to not dismiss it or
Hmm.
move past it and go, oh, just just
Hmm.
fight for your dreams and apply for that job. If there's a risk, then you'll learn. You're better off somewhere else.
Hmm.
I think that approach is incredibly idealistic and doesn't
Hmm.
name
Hmm.
the discrepancies in how we're all resourced. So, for
Hmm.
instance, if a social worker who's like, oh, I really would love to be a supervisor, but I'm worried about all these things. I'm an API social worker,
Hmm.
and somebody's like, yeah, just go for it. It's okay. What if they make a decent salary, but they care for kiddos? They
Hmm.
are sending money to auntie.
Hmm.
They are, helping their cousin with some bills that they're behind in. Their car just broke down. What if, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't know their situation,
Hmm.
and it's presumptuous for us to assume that this risk is okay for that person to take,
Hmm.
because in
Hmm.
many cases, when for folks of color, folks who are marginalized, like our risks are amplified because
Hmm.
our other choices are
Hmm.
muted,
Exactly.
and our ability to get another job that quick, like I'm not like a white dude who can
Yes.
jump in a suit and get a job super easily. like I
Yes.
our options are just limited because our
Hmm.
communities are limited, and of course
Hmm.
there's just this thing called institutional racism.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that risk is not easy to take for many of our
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
And so that's why I would start with validation that this is real, and here are the real risks that are associated, and these are real decisions that people have to weigh, and it really is about what feels good for that person in their space and in their time,
Hmm.
because all of that matters. Maybe in the future will be a better time for them to take those risks. Maybe now will be a good time to take those risks, but it is important for them to understand the risks involved, because what if they do apply for a promotion, they get it, and then they're like constantly like gaslit, and it's awful, and then they have to quit, and they wouldn't have quit if they were on a direct service clinical social worker. That that's stressful. So I think naming that truth is part of the freedom, in that saying essentially that, yeah, this isn't simple, it's an incredibly hard freaking decision. And there isn't going to be like a perfect answer. And it is going to be a little bit of like a risk assessment as to whether or not that makes sense for this person. The other piece that feels more, I think, hope filling, though, is for really, if there is the capacity in the context of that organization, or again, like a broader sort of network, that they really do lean on their people. You know, if there are other supervisors, you know, that they know would be supportive of their exploring this particular, you know, promotional opportunity or, you know, management opportunity, and that really would have their back in that way, be able to give them mentorship so that it's not like they're going in this position and they're frustrated with systems and, you know, they're constantly just like spinning their wheels. It's like they have a mentor, they have somebody, and organizations don't always do this. When you get promoted, you're like, oh, here, yeah, do your job and then figure it out. But you might have to like take that initiative to find your allies in the organization who can then help you succeed incrementally in that role, because it might not be the actual, you know, sort of leadership of that organization. The other piece is that, you know, social workers are amazing advocates, and there are ways to fight back. And I say this, you know, certainly knowing that social workers who have been mistreated in workplaces and who have fought back, and many of them are amazing organizers and have been successful at fighting back against their employers, that there are ways to do so, and making sure that you know the best practices in terms of, like, you know, documenting your experiences, in terms of resourcing yourself so that you are consulting with the appropriate people to know, is this okay? Is this actually legal? Or is this just like feel like, you know, uncomfortable? And being able to navigate that, and then integrating your client advocacy voice into your workplace voice as well. And I think, you know, it's and it's unfortunate that, you know, systems are like this, where we have to advocate not only for our communities but also within the context of organizations. But the reality is that the more API leaders we can get, the better resource we all will be. And so whatever when I say lean on your community, like, reach out to me. I'm happy to be a resource. Reach out to, you know, you all at the council. Like, we are your people. We are your people that can certainly, you know, brainstorm with you, that can really discuss what's going on, and, you know, if and support you through these experiences when you need like a sounding board, and let us make space for you. If we have that opportunity, let us do that for you. Let us connect you to people. Let us make recommendations for you. Let us introduce you. Let us use our networks. And that's essentially, you know, a big piece of what the API Council does and offers. And it's important that we take advantage of it, because it is incredibly hard to do on your own.
You know, there's this adage in a lot of communities of color, right? Because of them, I can. And I think it's true. Because of you, I can.
That.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's true because of the people who became before us. We can do it, and
Yes.
I'm so grateful for that piece of advice. I know the listeners are true, because, you know, I think we stand tall because of the people who came before us, and I'm so grateful we can lean on people like you, Nancy, other people on the committee who have paved the way in a lot of ways, you know, and we can continue to have this relational need to help our community as much as we can. So grateful
Absolutely.
for that wonderful piece of advice. Chris?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Man, it was just so empowering, you know, everything you shared, everything. You know, before we close, you know, how do you find personal joy or grounding or resilience by doing all this challenging work?
I'm still learning. You know, I think I've found certain things, and you know, a lot of the stereotypical things I think still do work for me. Like, I do Pilates, I take walks, but I always tell people, particularly students, you know, who are earlier in their career, like, you can't bubble bath your way out of oppression. So I think it's complete BS when we do these classes and they're like, oh, go for a walk, do some deep breathing. I'm like, really? Like, your livelihood is at stake, you know, your clients are going through incredible trauma, and you're telling me to take 3 deep breaths? Like, that doesn't work. And so, like, it's amazing, because, like, some of these tools, yes, not at all to say they're not helpful, but the reality is that, I don't know, maybe you both are laughing too, because in social work school we learned about all of these, like, self-care tips, and I don't remember any of them, nor do I reference them, because you kind of learn your own way, and there is some truth to them. However, one of the things that I found really healing for me was that there was so much of me that was, really about Deborah, the social worker, Deborah, the executive director, Deborah, the, domestic violence advocate, which, I love, more than anything, in terms of like, the ways in which I can walk through this world and do so much good. I think it's incredible and something that brings me joy to share with my children. But then the piece I noticed that wasn't being fed. It was just Deborah the human. Like, remember that Deborah who did volunteer work, who fell in love with the profession? And so recently I actually applied to volunteer at the local library. I did this really cheesy thing of volunteering at this fundraiser event, and like I was just like wearing this really dorky orange vest and like guiding people, and nobody knew who I was, right? Because I wasn't like the social worker, I wasn't the executive director, I wasn't anybody. I was just like this really, like fun volunteer, and I had so much fun, and it like fed something in me that was really just like it was about me and just being with people and not having a job to do. And so I think that would be my advice, that find your own pathway. Don't feel like you have to do the things that we learned in social work school. And feed the different parts of yourself, because we are very, very complicated people, and we're multidimensional, and so we need to honor all those various parts of us.
Thanks.
On behalf of Chris and myself and the API Council, we really want to express the privilege and the gratitude for your authenticity, your bravery, just talking about yourself. And thank you everyone for listening to Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, a collection of Asian and Pacific Islander social work voices presented by the NASW API Social Work Council North. Please continue to stay tuned for our next episode, which will be interviewing an API social work leader. And thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you, Francis and Chris.
It's such a privilege.